Well, he seemed to have depicted Atlantis in Africa. Now, a lot of people think that his map might have been inaccurate, that it might have been drawn from hearsay information.
Registration mark, but they don't line up.
They do. If you think like a pagan. An alien intelligence has got to be more advanced and in multiple dimensions.
And it was really strange that the closer I got this warping to be a globe, the closer the map started wrapping around the planet, saying exactly where Herodotus said Atlantis would be, is of course the Richat structure. But what I did find interesting is that it's not just Herodotus that has pointed to a river going from east to west. There's a French geographer who lived from 1700s to 1773 called Philippe Bouchet. Now, Philippe Bouchet was famous for having some of the first maps that had like lines drawn on them. But outside of that, he also was famous for making maps that showed the waterways throughout the world. So as you can see, right in Africa, here's Egypt, here's the Nile River, and here is some strange water passage that cuts across almost exactly where Herodotus would have claimed the Nile River would have had to cross from east to west. So to me, I find that the evidence showcasing that the Nile once ran from east to west wasn't just from one historian. It was from multiple ancient historians. And if you didn't know, Philippe Bouchet was also known for having created a map that showed Antarctica without ice. Very interesting. Now, the reason why I want to show you that the Nile River may have once run from east to west is for two reasons. One of them, I want to kind of give you guys a target for possibly looking for archaeological sites, because I've been scavenging Google Earth like a crazy. I mean, I think my eyes almost popped. It got so blooded with just looking at this for like hours after hours after hours. The point being is that when I decided to travel along this potential Nile path in Google Earth, I suddenly realized that there was all kinds of archaeological sites, possible never before seen pyramids, just things that you wouldn't believe would be found in the middle of this Sahara desert, but along this river you can find it. I'm actually going to save that for our future episode. Now I'm going to start to break down this big concept that I believe might be happening or may have happened with Atlantis in Egypt and all these cultures. If you read the historical accounts, there are a few cultures who believe that their history came from the Atlanteans. The Dogon people, which come from the Mali Cote d'Ivoire region, believe that they were originally from an island people. And the Egyptians also have it in the records that they might have been descendants of Atlanteans. So the way that I'm thinking about it, right? So if the Dogon people claim that they are from Atlanteans, if the Egyptians claimed they were Atlanteans, it seems likely that Atlanteans may have been African descendants. But what's also interesting is that if you studied the ancient Egyptian empires, you will realize there was another subsector of Egyptians that were from Nubia, a little bit more east of Egypt, and they were considered to be black pharaohs, essentially Egyptian royalties, Egyptian people that were of black heritage. These some of the most powerful female pharaohs of Egypt, like Nefertari, Ashotep, these were also African descendant individuals. In fact, part of the Egyptian history was how Nubia eventually assimilated with Egypt and became one race of people. But in the very beginning, in old Egypt, the Nubians were almost entirely African, like completely dark complexion, whereas the Egyptians were closer to more white-like complexions. So my inclination is that if Herodotus is saying that the Atlanteans are from Libya, and if the Egyptian cultures that are most closely related to the Nubian cultures, which are also considered to be amazing people, great archers, very powerful, very famous, that perhaps the Nubia culture were the descendants of Atlanteans that then assimilated with Egyptians. Thus, the records being somewhat scant about the history of Atlanteans. I was also reading that the seed race of Atlanteans was inherently different than Athenians, as if to say that they had physical attributes that can distinguish them from other races. I also thought it was interesting that here it says Atlantis was inhabited by quote unquote earthborn and primitive human beings. Now, primitive is obviously not a politically correct word. It's not something that we should be using, but primitive is up to debate. I mean, they thought the Mayans were primitive and they weren't very primitive. So I don't know if that necessarily means they're African. I'm just saying that earthborn seems more likely to possibly be of African descent. So I guess the question is, were the Atlanteans Africans? Were they simply West Africans that used to have a very powerful culture whose history has, for the most part, been eliminated? So it even says here, carrying with them the sacred and secret doctrine, these Atlanteans established themselves in Egypt, where they became its first divine rulers. And as I was just showing you, some of the first rulers of Egypt were actually of the Nubian type, the ones that were the black pharaohs. So could Atlanteans have been a highly sophisticated African, dark complexion culture whose history was completely misunderstood? Perhaps there was racial biases, ambiguity, thinking that they are high technological, so they must be white. I don't know. Everything I'm looking at shows that the Atlanteans were most likely African and of dark complexion. Here is another depiction of Egyptian prehistory with the black pharaohs. Now, something else I need to point out that is absolutely taking me back is that in these areas, right, when I started following that Nile River from east to west, do you see these like small Stonehenge structures? Well, what you will find around this area, which is absolutely fascinating, is that if you follow from Egypt all the way to where we believe Atlantis to be, you will find all kinds of pre-Islamic archaeological discovery sites. But what I found fascinating is all the sites from Atlantis to Egypt had very similar traits. As if to say, this entire desert region at one point was one culture. So, could it be that 12,000 years ago, some catastrophe occurred that essentially took down the Atlantean culture? But then what happened after that, right? So where did all the Atlanteans go? So if you didn't know, Nubia is over here. The Nubian desert is where they've been finding all kinds of interesting smaller pyramids, just things related to this black culture that was also associated with the Egyptians or had eventually assimilated with the Egyptians. But the Nubian Egyptian culture were very, very sophisticated for their time. And they were also located at the exact point where Herodotus had said the Nile had split from east to west, which was very fascinating. So here's the Nubian culture, here's where the Nile splits, and here's where we believe Atlantis to be. And I'm telling you, if you start going through this Nile River, you'll find all kinds of archaeological sites that match each other, as if to imply the entire desert region came from one single culture. And there's all kinds of evidence to suggest that. I just don't have enough time to go over today. We're going to go over next time their religion. We're going to go over pre-Islamic religion. We're going to talk about how Allah, what Allah stands for, which used to be Aliyah, which was actually a moon goddess. We're going to talk about the connections of that pre-Islamic Aliyah moon goddess and the connection of the Congo people in their religion and how they all assimilated into one single concept. It's a lot to consider. We are not done with this. We're going to keep pumping episodes. We got so much evidence to showcase. This was just an introduction episode to kind of showcase the ideas. Wanted to show you guys this map of Herodotus and how closely it relates to the actual Richat structure. Once again, thank you for joining me. This is Felipe Osario, signing out.